established to preserve the history of America's fire services, the National Fire Heritage Center recognizes authors of any books, periodicals, other modes of communication that help us to preserve that history. And to do that, we established the Ben Franklin Writers Award. That honors the fact that Ben Franklin was not only a publisher and a writer, but he was an advocate of the community fire service. And in our goal to preserve the history of America's fire services, we're pleased to present awards annually to authors whose works have been submitted and reviewed by a judge, a group of judges who score them and give them either gold, silver, or bronze awards, and based on those scores. I'm just real thrilled today to have the chance to introduce to you the author of one of the Gold Award winners. Bill Killen was I don't know if you can see this or not, but he authored the history of the Apollo and Skylab astronaut rescue team. And not only did he author it, he was a member of that team. And so, Bill, I'd like to give you a chance to first tell us a little bit about your background in the fire service and what led you to this team. And then from there, we'll look at how you went about writing the book.
Well, thank you, Lynn. I appreciate the opportunity to share this information with our sponsors and friends of the National Fire Heritage Center. When I was 16 years old, I joined the volunteer fire department where I lived in southern Maryland. We were right on the Potomac River, about 25 miles south of Washington, D.C. And I was really into being a volunteer firefighter. And in 1960, I was appointed a trainee with the United States Navy Civil Service. And 5 years later, I had an opportunity to be in Florida, and a friend of mine who had been in the volunteer fire service with me was with the Army Corps of Engineers, and he was with the team that was building the Kennedy Space Center. And I happened to visit with him. He said, you know, the Kennedy Space Center is looking for firefighters. So I called out of curiosity. I called and got hold of the fire chief. He said, come on in tomorrow for an interview. And the next day I went to the Kennedy Space Center and met with Chief Bill Eldridge. And he reached into his desk, pulled out a piece of paper and wrote on it and handed it to me. And it was an application that had the date July 19 on it. He said, fill this out and send it back to me and go ahead and report for work on the 19th of July. That was in 1965. And I guess my background at that point in time, I'd had about 9 years in the fire service and 5 years with the Navy in a facility that manufactured explosives. So anyway, I reported for duty on the 19th of July in 65. And that was in the middle of the Gemini program. And there was a lot of interaction and support of the Gemini missions. We got to meet a lot of the astronauts, which was a big deal for us young guys in the firehouse. And anyway, long story short, we had the tragic Apollo 1 fire that killed Gus Grissom and Roger Chaffee and Ed White. And as a result of that, NASA revised their procedures and policies and created the Apollo Astronaut Rescue Team. And on the first Monday in October 1968, I was one of 9 men selected to be on the original team. And for the next 2.5 months, we trained and got everything ready for the first trip to the moon, which was around the moon and come back home. And that's how I got to be on the Apollo Astronaut Rescue Team.
Wow, what a privilege and what an opportunity to meet and work on such an important time in our history to set the pace for our space program. And I think the astronauts themselves really had an appreciation for what your team did, knowing how critical that you were in saving their, potentially saving their lives. When you started working in this team, what were some of the challenges in the fire protection that you had to deal with that are unique to the space industry?
Well, one of the biggest challenges was becoming familiar with the command module, the switches. There were 6 members of this team whose mission was to go up on the launch tower into the White Room and be trained and prepared to open the command module and to extract all 3 astronauts. And every member, every one of those 6 men had a special job, but we all were trained to do each other's job. So any one of us could have gone into the command module, safed the module, and disconnected the cables from each of the astronaut suit and extract them from the command module. What was unique about it was that we were really focused on physical conditioning. By the time the Apollo 8 mission was ready to launch, we were running about 4 miles, and it's not a real fast run, but just a jog with about 40 pounds of equipment. And I certainly wish I was in that shape again today. But we were familiar with the launch tower with the 363-foot Saturn V rocket, each of the components. We trained a lot with the fuels and oxidizers. We even trained in firefighting with the mixture of monomethyl hydrazine and red fuming nitric acid or nitrogen tetroxide, which was an interesting and exciting training session as I look back on it. But we were completely familiar with the launch tower, the command module, and all of the equipment there, and with the astronauts' suits and their helmets. And our job was to be able to take their helmets off of them and put a oxygen mask on them, seat them in a stretcher chair, and extract them from the command module.
So when the rocket was blasted off, where were you at that point in time?
Well, Lynn, that's something funny. My wife did not know until about 6 months before the book was published that the astronaut rescue team was about 15 to 1,800 feet from the Saturn V rocket at launch. The blast danger zone of the Saturn V rocket was 7,000 feet. If that rocket exploded on the launch pad, everything within 7,000 feet was toast. And we were sitting there at 1,600 feet, and armored personnel carriers in that blast danger zone. And that was quite exciting. You know, the Apollo 8, those launched, the vibrations from the Saturn V, the armored personnel carriers actually vibrated and moved about 2 feet.
Wow.
And then for the next launch, NASA had gimbaled the rocket engines so that we didn't have that kind of vibration. And by the time we got to the last Apollo mission, which was at night, we had gotten so relaxed that we had the hatch of the armored personnel carrier open, and we're all standing there with our cameras taking pictures of the launch. And got some fantastic pictures that I took with my camera of the Apollo 17 launch.
Well, when you think about the uniqueness of this component of America's fire service, and the way it evolved and how you really created the fire protection process on the job training, you might say. What do you, how did you go about deciding what to write about in the book? How did you decide to put the book together?
Well, part of it, I guess, Lynn, goes back to 1994. Lee Starrick, who retired from the Kennedy Space Center Fire Department, he was on the shuttle mission at our rescue teams. Lee and I co-authored the history of the Kennedy Space Center Fire Department, and I had saved a lot of material. And at FDIC in 2019, watching the news one evening after the meetings were over, they had a clip of the astronauts going to the van, and it was coming up and talking about the 50th anniversary of the Apollo program. In fact, NASA is observing the 50th anniversary of the Apollo program from 2018 through 2022. And it just happened to have a clip, and lo and behold, my wife says, "Look, there you are." And the clip they were using was one of the clips of me escorting the astronauts from the manned spacecraft operations building to the transfer van on their way to the launch pad. And I got to thinking about it, 50 years later, no one ever wrote anything about the astronaut rescue team. There were a couple of stories in some newspapers, but no one ever captured the history of this unique team. And it was very unique because this team only lasted through the Apollo and the Skylab programs, and the space shuttle missions. It was a completely different mechanism for rescuing the astronauts from aboard. So I thought it would be appropriate to try and document the history of the team and 9 Department of Defense medics and 45 Kennedy Space Center firefighters served on the various teams. It was an all-volunteer mission up until the Apollo 17 and the Skylab programs, when NASA authorized the establishment of a permanent rescue team.
Very good. And so when you started writing the book, how did you engage other members of the team, or did you just operate out of your memory, or how did you go about making sure that you covered all the facts you could?
Well, then I'm a pack rat, and I've got several filing cabinets full of folders with a lot of documents that I've saved over the years, including report cards from high school. And so I went back and talked to the surviving members of the team, and I was fortunate enough to locate one of the Army paramedics that was on all of the Apollo missions, and that was Jim Tanner, who was a retired Command Sergeant Major in the United States Army. And I'd worked with Jim for years in the space program and didn't know until I met with him in Alabama about a year before his death that he had been awarded the Silver Star for heroism in Korea as an 18-year-old.
Wow.
Spent some time with Jim, reminiscing about the history and getting some documentation. Spent a lot of time with Gerald Tadpole Driscoll, who happened to have some photographs that I was able to use in the book, and Gene Weldon and Buck Thorne. There's only 4 of us who are still alive from the original team. And I had a lot of photographs, a lot of documents. I had a lot of interesting artifacts from the space program, such as a cue card that was used in training for operating the lunar rover, the American flag off Neil Armstrong's training suit, autographed vehicle passes for getting into the Space Center. Had a lot of material like that. And one of the interesting things was that for every mission, there was a special envelope canceled with a cachet on it. And one day I went over to see Jules Bergman, and I could see he was on the air. The red light was on, and there was a fellow sitting there relaxed. And I looked down and I said, "Good morning, General. How are you, sir?" He looked up at me and smiled, and he says, "A lot of people didn't know I was a general." I said, "Oh, yes, sir. You very distinguished career in World War II in Korea and the reserves." And he said, "I'll bet you're here to see Jules." He told me he had a friend in the fire department coming over. I said, "Would you mind autographing these Apollo 12 mission cards envelopes?" He said, "No, I don't mind at all." And he autographed them for me. Fellow most of us know as Jimmy Stewart from the Hollywood era. So, but I had a lot of material like that. And one of the most interesting things that I had was I had a copy of the original Apollo mission rescue procedures manual. This is pre-Apollo 1. And then I have the Apollo rescue manual post-Apollo 1 fire, which contains some detailed drawings. And I've looked everywhere and I cannot find any documentation in NASA's records or any of the folks from Kennedy Space Center. And I believe those are the only 2 surviving documents on the Apollo astronaut rescue team procedure.
I think it's awesome that you had that interest to preserve that history all along. And that's something that there are pack rats or have their place. I live with one, but I hope that at some point in time, all of those wonderful documents will be in the National Fire Heritage Archives. I also wanted to share that in presenting this award, in addition to recognizing the outstanding work of these authors, we wanted to encourage other people who might be thinking about taking on a new aspect of history, the fire service to write about. Do you have any suggestions for potential writers, something that would help them maybe get past the starting hurdle or to help them along the way?
Well, I would encourage anyone who has been involved with anything that's unique to the fire service, or whether it be a particular type of fire, or a firefighting experience, a training experience, or a piece of equipment. it's worth documenting, taking pictures and keeping records, and most important, interview people who are involved and save that, even if you don't do anything with it for a while. Down the road, that's what the National Fire Heritage exists for, is to preserve that type of information. And writing a book is a lot easier than you might think. It just takes a little bit of time and perseverance.
Very good. Well, in addition to your role in writing this book, you've been a key person with the National Fire Heritage Center in getting it going and serving as its past president. Would you like to share something to encourage people to become more involved with the Fire Heritage Center and its mission?
I'm constantly talking to people about what the mission of the National Fire Heritage Center is and why they should be involved. History is extremely important. I've been interested in history all my life. In 10th grade, I took American history. I read the book before the second semester was even halfway through. And I'm really interested in American history, particularly in the fire service. And I think it's worthy of preserving our history for those young people ahead. I'm preserving it for my grandchildren, my 3 great-grandchildren. And I think that it's important. Every aspect of the fire service, and people don't realize how broad, how wide the fire service is. If fire protection engineers who design fire safety into buildings, we have floating cities called aircraft carriers that has their own fire department on board with unique requirements. Or we have people who are architects that design buildings and design fire protection into it, or wildland firefighters, or firefighters who deal with industrial fire brigades. It's people who deal with risk management and fire prevention. It's not just the little red truck from the fire guys at the firehouse. It's so much broader than that. And it's important that we record and preserve that history.
Thank you, Bill. I think it is so critical, and I think about all the challenges. We look up, watch the news every day. We see things that are happening, and having our history to remind us where we've come from and how we've gotten on to hurdles in the past and have discovered new things, and then discover things that we think are going to fix the problem, create problems. It's just a great way to get a perspective on the future. If we don't know how we got here, how will we know where we're going? I can tell myself sometimes. But in addition to writing this book, Bill has written some other books that were recipients of the Bronze Award, and we'll be talking to him about those later. So I want to encourage you to stay tuned and keep in touch with the Fire Heritage website. It's called fireheritageusa.org to see the next winner's presentations and to watch for Bill's next interview. Thank you, Bill, and we look forward to that interview.
Thank you.